A lot of the internet these days feels pretty bought and paid for, don't you think? Well, at Escape Collective, we are also bought and paid for. The difference being that we are bought and paid for by you, which changes things dramatically. We're a member-funded group of journalists, and we call the shots. No hidden agendas, no sneaky links. Just trust. EscapeCollective.com/join. Support what we do.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Geek Warning Podcast, brought to you by the Escape Collective. You're a one-stop shop for everything you want to know about this week in the world of bicycle tech. And kind of what a week it's been. So Shimano just announced its new GRX Di2 wireless electronic gravel group set. Felt is back on the scene with a new VR endurance road bike. And after a very, very brief period of uncertainty, Kona's back in action. Not only that, but another old brand name that you probably have heard of, maybe making a return as well. We'll get to that in a minute. We're also going to talk about different motivations for and against custom bikes. We're going to chat about our favorite saddles in this week's Pick One segment. And we've got a PSA on why you probably want to set some time aside to visit your local mechanic. I'm James Huang, and my partner in crime today is Escape Collective Senior Tech Editor Dave Rome. Dave, I am curious. Are you starting to wonder if, if either you and I have worked together for so long that I'm pretty much able to read your mind, or if I'm somehow able to access your computer remotely, because I somehow seem to be pretty spot on lately with a bunch of stuff you've been planning on writing lately?
Right now, I'm thinking it's very much the latter. I'm quite convinced I need to change my passwords. So,
perfect.
You've been. Yeah, I think we're pretty good at knowing what we maybe each of us might be working on, and our point of views and all that. But for you to keep suggesting topics that are in my draft folder is hitting a bit too close to home.
Either that, or we're sort of like the tech editor equivalent of an old married couple.
It seems that way. Yeah.
Well, Dave, we do finally have a week without a corrections corner, so let's go ahead and dive into the news. First up this week, Shimano just announced yesterday its new GRX Di2 wireless electronic group set. And in most ways, it's kind of what people were expecting to see, I think.
It's less than what people were expecting to see.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
So just like with Shimano's latest Road Di2 group set, so GRX Di2 has moved to a semi-wireless format, which is why I call it wireless, with two independent dual control levers, each housing its own batteries and wireless transmitters. And then you've got front and rear derailleurs that are connected to each other and powered by a central battery hidden away inside the frame. So the levers themselves aren't all that different from the previous version in terms of like what your fingers feel. So there are still 3 buttons per lever, basically a nearly identical shape. You have like a similarly aggressive texture on the hoods, and you kind of still have that neat rubberized coating on the brake lever blades. Still I would say still a very refined feel overall. They're slightly bigger than the previous ones since you have to have batteries and the transmitter in there now. But as far as what your fingers feel, again, like basically none of that has changed. But yes, it is now 12-speed out back. You have the same 1134 or 1136 tooth cassettes that were originally launched with current Gen 105. And then up front, you've got your choice of 4831 or 4630 chain rings. And if you're waiting for me to go through the one-by options, you're going to be waiting a bit, because Shimano, unfortunately, has only released 2-by variants for GRX Di2 so far. And they're not really talking 1-by at all. So who knows when it's coming.
It's a good thing no one riding gravel wants 1-by. It's so yeah. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it, which is this launch felt very lackluster. It was very much widely anticipated to see where Shimano goes with GRX. I think it was well assumed that there'd be a Di2 version of the mechanical group set that was released last year that I tested. That was great, and sort of merged some mountain bike tech with some road tech. But I think people were expecting more from this Di2 release. I think at a minimum 1-by options, but yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it basically just feels like effectively they've taken the old lever and created a clutch version of the existing road derailleur and taken an old crank, a lower end cassette, and released it as a group set. And I know that that's perhaps a very unfair statement to say to Shimano, but it's, I mean, there's not a lot brand new going on here.
The thing that's frustrating for me is that, like, if I look at this purely objectively, so Shimano, I think no one will argue that they do front shifting better than anyone, especially in Di2 form.
Yes.
And then if you look at the total available range, if you go with that 1136 cassette, the total range, it's something like 507% or something, which is just shy of the 520 that you get with a SRAM mullet setup. So in terms of total range, Shimano is, I would say, effectively equaling what you can get with a mullet right now. So from an engineering standpoint, which is always how Shimano looks at everything, they're like, this is great. You get the tighter gaps at the back. You still get the total range. Everything works awesome. Everyone should love this. The problem that I see at this point is that SRAM has done such a good job of just repeatedly telling people over and over again that one by is the way to go, that even if you can make a technical argument for two by, no one's going to care. That is the issue here. Like it reminds me so much of the XTR Di2 launch that happened in like 2015. And I tested the crap out of that. I rode a bike at the 6-day Breck Epic with an XTR Di2 setup, and that was a 2x11. Worked exceptionally well. It worked so good. I had it set up in sequential mode with just one shifter on the right side. It was awesome. But SRAM had already introduced XX1, which was the first modern 1x drivetrain. They had already introduced that in 2012. So that was 3 years prior to XTR Di2 launching. So even when that thing came out, it was already obsolete. And
you're already seeing a lot of mountain bikes going one by only in frame design when Shimano was still pushing a front derailleur.
Because like if you look at it from a frame perspective viewpoint, why would you want to make a frame that is more complicated and it has more restrictions when you don't have to, particularly when the consumer base seems to have latched on to the simplicity of just a single chainring? Because I definitely agree that, like, you and I have talked about this a bunch. Explore with that SRAM Explore with that 1044 cassette, it's pretty wide, but not wide enough still for a lot of people. Whereas 1052, I would say definitely has the range for a lot of people, but the gaps are pretty big. It's definitely not what I would prefer to run in a group. So on paper, Shimano's 2x12 setup is awesome. And having ridden it the last few days, I will agree that, like, cerebrally, it is the way to go because it does work so well. But again, I would say this is a situation where, and we've seen this multiple times in the past, SRAM seems to be better at reading the market and giving people what they want, whereas Shimano has a firm belief of what it thinks people should want and delivers that instead.
And I think there is probably still a small market out there that are demanding 2x Di2 for gravel, especially those that sort of use a gravel bike more as an all-rounder bike. Maybe it's for commuting, maybe it's also as a road bike. They're riding in road groups. I still think 2x still has its place in gravel, but certainly when you look at the broader market, to not release a 1x option, it feels like they'd be missing at least, I'm guessing, I'm going to say as much as 70, 80% of demand right now. Shimano just did this launch event at Pete Stetina's Carson City Pay Dirt event in Carson City, Nevada, which is an awesome event, by the way, super fun. But I did ask specifically about OEM partners since, I think, Dave, you and I are used to seeing releases from SRAM and from their various OEM partners that are very, very coordinated in terms of having complete bikes available with the new parts at launch day. Like for Red, I think you said there was something like 40 brands or something that were just ready to go on launch day. And when I asked Shimano about this, they said the only bikes that were going to be available, the only brands that were going to be available with bikes at launch were Ventum, Lightspeed, Obed, and Mosaic. And since then, I confirmed with a few product managers, I mean, off the record mostly, from major brands that
They're basically holding out for one buy. You're going to see like onesie twosie models from big brands, like the big ones. You'll see onesie twosie bikes spec'd with GRX Di2 two buy, but by and large, everyone very clearly is waiting for one buy, and it's not ready.
It's not ready. And my question to you, James, is when you consider what SRAM has done with one buy in the market, and there are rumors floating around that SRAM is due to update its Explore group set yet again. I don't know when, but it'll probably happen at some point. Do you think when Shimano does release a one buy version of Di2, and we kind of can assume what it'll be like given what we know of the mechanical one buy options at the moment, do you think it'll be enough?
I don't think so, honestly, at this point, because Shimano is, to me anyway, Shimano is so on the back foot with drivetrain progression. Again, it wasn't that long ago where SRAM was in an incredibly bad position because they could not figure out front shifting. Well, I shouldn't say they couldn't figure out, but rather they had their hands so thoroughly tied by patents that Shimano held that they could not make front shifting work off-road for sure. So they made the very savvy decision to just be like, screw it. We're just going to get rid of the front derailleur completely. Whereas Shimano, knowing full well that they are exceptionally good at front shifting, they keep leaning into that, which again, from a technological standpoint, probably makes a lot of sense. But from a marketing standpoint, people are like, front derailleurs are kind of lame.
For gravel.
For gravel, yes. I mean, for sure, like you said, there are still uses and very strong applications for a 2x setup with a tighter range cassette, road, all road, certain types of gravel, like you said. But for the general gravel market, if you look at what's available right now, at the mid to high end, I mean, it's one buy, first of all, and it's SRAM electronic wireless one buy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I don't know the timing. We don't know the timing of when Shimano plans to release its one by gravel. It's assumed it'll come out with mountain bike Di2.
100%.
That's kind of what we believe the delay is. I think the timing is going to be pretty similar to when SRAM has its next generation of Explore ready. And I believe that what we're going to see is that SRAM basically looks like they're an entire generation of group set ahead when we see these two group sets hit the market. Yeah.
I mean, I think I would... If what we're hearing about rumblings, or in terms of rumblings as far as when these things are coming out, then I think I'd agree with you on that one. Which is unfortunate because again, like this XTR Di2 stuff, it works great. Like it is super, super refined, super polished. Shifting is amazing. Ergonomics are really good. Everything just feels done. But the fact that it has two chainrings up front is kind of a deal breaker for a lot of people.
Yeah. My other issue, this is probably getting in the weeds a bit, but my other issue with this group set is that 11 to 36 tooth cassette, which is the biggest cassette option for this new group set in a 2x configuration, is actually a 105 level cassette. It got released with the 105 12-speed mechanical. It isn't Hyperglide Plus, which is like Shimano's way of making the shift to a harder gear smoother. So it lacks that sort of more detailed ramping in the cassette. GRX Di2 is meant to be kind of an Ultegra equivalent level product, but then to not offer a cassette higher level than a 105 just feels like it's like they haven't really invested in it.
It almost seems like Shimano, in their characteristically conservative manner, like it almost seems like they're still waiting to see if gravel is going to survive. Like if it's going to be, if it's really going to be a thing.
Yeah.
But it's like, it is very much a thing. And like, it seems pretty clear that it's not going away. And it just boggles my mind that Shimano, a company with so much resources at its hand, at hand, why GRX Di2 just feels so kind of tepid.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we're talking like when GRX 12-speed mechanical got released last year, it was reusing cassettes from the mountain bike side went for the 1x and cassettes from the road side for 2x. They didn't change the crank. They changed the chainring spacing a little bit, but it was the same crank set, same carryover chain. The shifters were renewed, but not massively. Again, like the derailleurs, not massively overhauled either. Obviously made to work with 12-speed, but like, same clutch mechanism, same general design. Like, yeah, it doesn't feel like Shimano is hugely committed to trying to keep pace with where SRAM's going.
I mean, it almost seems like kind of a difference in perspective as far as priorities go, because to be clear, SRAM's mullet setups, I mean, they very much are the same thing in terms of they're a mashup of gravel and mountain bike componentry, right? But they were very savvy in terms of when everything was released, whereas Shimano is just kind of like it's like those two sides of the company don't talk to each other or something. Like it would have been such a more powerful and impactful release if GRX Di2 were launched at the same time as presumably DRXT Di2 and XTR Di2, and they had all of these awesome compatibilities between each other and all these different drivetrain possibilities that you could mix and match for all these different applications. If Shimano had done that, holy crap, we'd be having a totally different conversation right now.
For sure. Yeah. So anyway, all right. Well, yeah, I think it's worth reminding people that I think Shimano is killing it, and it's good to see them still pushing forward in the entry level space, a space that SRAM's basically let go of and decided they can't be competitive in. But yeah, I mean, at this high end, it really feels like SRAM's making some significant strides at the moment, and
huge.
Shimano's got to be hurting in this area.
And again, to be very clear, having ridden this GRX Di2 stuff for a few days now, like, it is fantastic stuff in terms of how well it works. But I'm not sure that matters if what you have is something that works incredibly well that people don't really want.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess we'll see where this goes. So Shimano, get the lead out. All right, Dave, let's move on. Next up, Felt is a bike brand that we kind of honestly haven't really heard a whole lot from after Rosignol bought them in 2017, or even since the company changed hands again a couple of years ago, being bought by the parent company of KTM. It's like we're seeing some signs of life here, though. What have they come out with?
Yeah, they've come out with what looks to be a really nice endurance road bike. So some might say it's an all-road bike. I still like the term endurance road bike. But yeah, basically we're looking at a carbon bike, a sort of a mid-level build. It only goes up to sort of an Ultegra Di2 level bike. But yeah, it looks good. Looking at the geometry, it has a really generous stack height with good reach figures. And that's sort of a category that, with that sort of stack height, there's not a huge amount of choice for consumers. Really, like Trek de Money and Specialized Roubaix are sort of the two bikes that hit that sort of stack level, and as we know, both of those bikes are incredibly expensive. So it's nice to see Felt sort of bringing a bike for the masses.
So just to recap some of the features here, up the tire clearance up to 700 by 38. So I guess I would classify it as a all road or even like gravel light kind of bike as far as what you could do with it. Fully integrated cable, or fully hidden cabling, I should say, as you would totally expect these days. Felt
with a D-shaped steerer.
Yep, and that allows them to keep kind of more normal-sized upper headset bearings, so it shouldn't be like a super bulbous headset like we see on some other bikes. They're going with an asymmetrical T47 threaded bottom bracket, which is pretty similar to what Cervelo does. What I'm curious about is this seat tube anti-vibration sleeve that they're talking about. Do we have any information on that?
Not really. I mean, I'm trying to remember the brand. I'd like to say Giant did similar with their Revolts.
Pivot definitely did something like that with their Vault.
Pivot definitely have it in their gravel bike. But yeah, basically it's sort of like it separates the seat post to the seat tube with some kind of almost elastomer material. So it just, I guess, gives it the ability to flex a little bit more on the seat tube, and also I guess separate those two for vibration damping. So I have no idea how well it works, but yeah, they're using a standard 27.2 round seat post with which is kind of isolated within the seat tube.
The bike sounds pretty good. I can't remember the pricing off the top of my head, but if I remember correctly, it was actually pretty decent. Which it was kind of needs to be, since felt isn't exactly doesn't exactly have the brand cachet that it once did. I let's just say I'm rooting for Felt to do well with this bike, because it seems like it's the right bike at kind of the right pricing with the right features for the mainstream in the market.
Yeah,
and it looks pretty good.
For sure. It's just going to be awareness and their dealer network. That is the two limitations with this bike. I mean, I think the bike itself is going to be pretty solid, and it looks like they've hit all the right features, but it's just, as you kind of just alluded to there, James, like Felt's kind of fallen off a bit in terms of being top of mind for people. I wouldn't put it in the top 15 brands right now, as far as, if you were shopping for a road bike, as far as a brand that comes to mind. So they've got some work to do, but I think this bike will hopefully help them get there.
Yeah, definitely a step in the right direction. So we'll see. Speaking of a step in the right direction, Kona. We talked about Kona just a few weeks ago, about how they were clearly in a world of hurt after that whole debacle of Sea Otter with their booth being set up and then suddenly taken down the night before the show, no explanation, so on and so forth.
And the day after launching a new gravel bike.
The day after launching a new gravel bike, right. So news just broke a few days ago. So Kona was just repurchased by the original company founders, Dan Gerhard and Jake Heilbronn, and they bought it from Kent Outdoors less than 3 years after they sold the company to Kent in the first place. And it actually sounds like this is a pretty good turn in the right direction, fingers crossed. So in a statement, they said, quote, "We believed that the new owners would carry our vision forward and continue to build great bikes, employ great people, and deliver on the promise of quality, fun, and a little weirdness that had defined Kona for so long. Unfortunately, that plan unfolded quite differently, so now we're buying Kona back," unquote. I would agree that Kent Outdoors did a pretty poor job of managing Kona. So a couple of changes that happened right away. So the founding duo, they've paused consumer direct sales immediately, and noting that they say pause, not terminate or anything.
Sure.
But they have killed the idea of super crazy discounts like that buy one get one deal that Kona had just a few months ago, and they're supposedly doubling down on kind of like good value and Kona's IBD network, which were sort of, I'd say, like kind of like the foundation and hallmark of Kona back in the day.
Was, yeah.
And like as for what's next, I mean, it sounds like they certainly have a lot of stabilizing to do. Like they need to get that patient so that they're not on the verge of death at this point, and then they can figure out how to really make it healthy again.
Yeah. Yeah. No numbers were shared. I mean, it's all private sales, so we don't know what the brand was sold for and what it was bought back for, but you'd have to assume that they bought it back for a lot less versus what they had sold it for.
God, I hope so. I certainly hope so. I hope Dan and Jake have been, at least kind of enjoying some of the fruits of their labor from having built up that company themselves for so long.
Yeah, it's a pretty iconic brand.
It's a super iconic brand. And, another thing that I thought was really cool was, they definitely emphasized that they really want to retain, they said very specifically, of course they're saying this, but they really want to maintain as much of the employee base as they possibly can. Like they're really emphasizing that, kind of the people are what make the company, which I am certainly a firm believer in. And they're going to retain their existing two headquarters and stuff, or their two offices, I'd say. And I think it's somewhere in Washington and somewhere in British Columbia. I can't remember the exact cities. It does sound encouraging because, like you said, Kona is such an iconic brand. They did such good work and made so many good bikes for so long. I would love to see them come back and just kind of restore their former glory. It'd be awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and they're a brand that was fundamental in the growth of certain disciplines. Like I would associate them very closely with the growth of cyclocross in the US.
With the Jake the Snake.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. They're responsible for the growth of freeride mountain biking. There's no bike in that category more iconic than the Kona Stinky. Pink Bike basically was founded off the Kona Stinky. So yeah, I mean, that's like I just think about it, and like, when I was coming into mountain biking, their hardtails, their entry-level hardtails, I used to, I absolutely loved what they were doing in that space. I think there was a Kona Dog, maybe. It was like the bike that I dreamed of having, a full suspension bike.
Right, and it was Dog, DAWG.
Yeah, so yeah, for me, like it is an iconic brand, and I have a lot of fond memories with that brand, and it's cool to see them back in a position where they could come back.
Yeah, it's like they established their identity as being sort of a counterculture brand.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, like they're the first brand that I can think of that actually did bikes for heavier riders.
Yep.
For Clydesdale riders. Like that's, they, at a time, and I can't think of any other brand that even got into that category while Kona was pushing ahead in it. So,
I mean, they were smart. I mean, it's not like they were big like Trek or Specialized or Giant. So they did what a smaller competitive would have to do, which is differentiate themselves. And they did a great job of it.
Yeah.
Certainly the bikes weren't always like the best or anything like that, or like the most innovative. But they didn't need to be, and they weren't necessarily trying to be. They were trying to be like good workhorse bikes for, kind of just everyday people with everyday paychecks. So, Kona, we're rooting for you. So we'll see what happens with you guys from here on out. But yeah, fingers crossed this goes well. So the news that I was alluding to earlier in the show. So remember Interbike? That North American trade show started in 1982, ran all the way to its final sad event in Reno, Nevada in 2018. And since
Were
then,
you there?
I was there, and it was very sad.
At the 2018 version, not the 1982 version.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. No, in 1982, I would have been 8.
What's your excuse?
I didn't know about it, clearly. Anyway, so since Interbike closed its doors in 2018, really hasn't been anything to take its place in North America. I mean, except maybe Sea Otter, but that's a consumer show. It's not really like a B2B event. Either way, like Sea Otter is not really a trade show in the traditional sense. But anyway, there are apparently rumblings now that the show might be attempting a comeback back to Las Vegas, although thankfully not on the Strip. So according to lvsportsbiz.com, Interbike's owners, Emerald Expositions, apparently are in talks with the city to bring the show back potentially as early as 2026. This time it's going to be way out on the west end of town, though, near the Summerlin development. No other information to share for now, but this is a really interesting one because I think if you were to survey industry people and ask at this point, like, do we need Interbike back? A few years ago, I would say shortly after Interbike died, I think most people would say like, we don't really need it. But Eurobike, I think, has become a pretty different show these days. Like, it's almost basically just an e-bike show, to some extent anyway. I would almost argue that now, this far out, if they came back in 26, that'd be an 8-year hiatus. It kind of feels like it'd be a good time for Interbike to come back. Like, I think there is a place for a North American business-oriented trade show to return. And as much as Las Vegas was definitely becoming a controversial location, the fact that it's at least going to be off the Strip is a big deal.
Yeah, I'm in two minds about this, but my main thought with this is that the decline of the true independent bike shop would be the struggle for a trade show in North America. So all these sort of vertically integrated shops that are now linked with a single brand wouldn't have much reason to attend a trade show because the brand they're linked with already comes to them and probably wouldn't attend this show. So I think that is going to be the biggest hurdle for an industry, a true industry show is, actually getting in front of enough independent bike dealers who would find value in coming out to find out all that's new and put their orders in place and do all that. And for me, I don't know, my gut feel is that the retail market has moved on.
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible. Again, it's hardly a slam dunk. But if it came back on a smaller scale, and I'd say there is still always I'd say there is still room for a show like this, particularly for smaller brands that don't have big budgets. And like you said, like the independent bike dealers who are still truly independent, they have come to rely on these kind of small to mid-range brands, the Felts and the Konas, so to speak. And a show like Interbike, I think would have a place, and as long as they are smart about how big it's going to be, the fact that it's going to be off the strip means that the expenses are going to be way lower. You know, they're not going to have a demo event way out in Bootleg Canyon. It can be right there. The west end of Las Vegas actually has some pretty good road riding and some pretty good mountain bike trails out there. So it could potentially be almost like a pseudo all-in-one thing, or at least pretty close together. Yeah, it's intriguing. So again, we don't really have any firm info on this one, but yeah, I'm curious about it. Like if the show came back in 2026, I think I'd probably go.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to see where this goes and what sort of buy-in they get from the industry, because you know that's absolutely going to make or break it as well. So you know, if they only get 100 exhibitors, then that's not going to be worth it for people to, you know, spend 3 days away from the shop with the expenses and all. But yeah, if it's anywhere, you know, even if it's half the size of Interbike in its heyday, then it's probably going to be something worth attending. Yeah,
we will see. All right, Dave, let's take a quick break. All right, so Dave, we just published my review kind of / thought piece on a genuinely lovely GT1 I-45 titanium gravel bike that Mosaic custom built just for me, just for this review, actually. You can go read it on the site right now. So this was built as a loaner, not a keeper, just to be very, very clear. Totally awesome bike to ride. All the usual accolades that you would assign to a high-end titanium bike, like, you know, that lovely zingy ride quality, so on and so forth. Obviously fit, the bike obviously fit and handled exactly how I wanted it to, given that the geometry was done to my preferences. And with that custom paint job, like no question, this is one of the prettiest bikes I've ever ridden. Like, it was gorgeous. I kind of had a hard time reviewing it though, Dave, because I think you'd share my concern that writing a review of a custom bike is challenging, because, you know, by definition, you are reviewing a bike that was built for you, not for somebody else, and not something that somebody else is likely to buy in that exact configuration. So for a lot of that time, I kind of kept wondering myself about I kind of found myself wondering more about the pros and cons of custom bikes in general, particularly given how good modern off-the-shelf bikes are. So yeah, I can't remember the frame or complete bike weights of that Mosaic off the top of my head. But safe to say, for that amount of money, as it was built, full retail price was like $12,500 US. So that buys quite a lot of off the shelf bike. So yeah, I'm wondering, Dave, have you ever given any thought to a fully custom bike for yourself? And if you have, what would it even be?
Yes, absolutely. And I've never committed to getting one because fundamentally I would end up closely mimicking the geometry of production bikes that already exist, because they've got that fairly dialed for me, and I'm not so far outside of the bell curve that I feel like I need to be different to what some of the bikes on the market already offer. And then you add in that custom bikes typically don't bring advantages in tire clearance. They certainly aren't lighter. The ride quality is different, but not necessarily better. And even aesthetically, I feel like I can achieve much of what I'm looking for with a production bike. I end up just taking the lazy and often cheaper route.
I mean, I'm not going to say that you're right or wrong with that. And again, that's kind of a lot of what I struggled with this review was, realistically, I kind of came to this sort of head versus heart kind of argument in my head, because if you look at it from just a purely logical standpoint, let's say you don't need custom geometry, like you mentioned. Like for me, I've got a longer torso and shorter legs for my height. So in this particular case, a custom geometry did work quite well. Like the reach dimension on this bike is longer than anything that Mosaic offers in stock geometry. Like I think even their 62 stock geometry or something, the reach isn't as long as it is on this bike. It's the one I have on this bike. It's like 407 or something.
And made for a short stem.
Yeah. But that said, would I have been just as happy on like a BMC ERS with a custom paint job and fancy parts and like enough money for a trip somewhere? Maybe. It's hard to say, but anyway, like I said, there weren't any real right or wrong answers here, but I was really just more curious about people's motivations to go custom in general. So I ended up posting a question to my Instagram account. And as of the time that we're recording this right now, it had something like almost 170 replies to it. And honestly, nearly every one of those replies was good and thoughtful and insightful. And people's motivations were kind of all over the place, but people said that they wanted something built just for them, or they wanted to have some sort of connection with the person or in the brand that they were working with.
Yeah,
or
that's a big one.
Yeah, totally. Or they did want a custom paint job, and they wanted to be able to go with the exact options that they wanted in terms of accessory mounts and stuff like that. But ultimately, the big thing was really, yes, production bikes, particularly with all the huge amounts of money that they invest in R&D, with very, very few, I would say almost no exceptions, you are not going to find a custom bike that is stiffer or lighter or comfier or whatever, like you said. Very few instances. But what people want is they just want something that they love that was made for them. They don't necessarily want or need the est of anything. No. They kind of just want that personal touch. And then they just want something made for them that they can say, this was mine, this was made for me. And they couldn't give a crap if there's something out there that's lighter or comfier or stiffer or more air or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got a few thoughts there, but I think, for me, obviously my income as a cycling tech rider isn't super conducive to me ordering the titanium or steel custom bike of my dreams.
Oh yeah, you've got to sign in Fenton on the way, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I think there are certain bikes that I absolutely lust over owning, and a lot of it is the connection to the builder and sort of knowing the thought and manual labor that has gone into that, and knowing that every single step of the process is sort of created by one or two people that you can talk to and sort of have that lifelong connection with, and you'll always have a bike that who built it, and perhaps you might come across someone else who's owned one of those bikes, and you're friends with that person because you're one of a few hundred people that have experienced that. So I totally get the desire to have a custom bike, and I think in certain disciplines, I would love to have a gravel bike that is titanium, that I don't have to worry about dents and dings, and I know it's durable, and I know it'll last for as long as I want to keep it for. But yeah, the other thought with that is that often you hear people talking about only getting a titanium bike or a steel bike as their last bike or the forever bike, and I think that's kind of bullshit.
Yeah, I'm not into the whole forever bike concept.
Yeah, I think trends change, you change as a rider. I think consider getting yourself a custom bike when you need a bike, not to wait until it might be the last bike you ever get. It's a bike. And yeah, I don't think it should be considered in that sort of idea that you hold on to that forever. Maybe you do, but I think expecting it to be like that will probably lead to disappointment.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, again, I really struggled a lot with how to write this review, and ultimately the conclusion that I came to with just sort of custom bikes in general anyway is just sort of ride whatever the hell makes you happy. Buy the bike that makes you smile. Buy what makes you feel good. Mm-hmm. And honestly, to hell with what anybody else thinks or what anyone else says you should be riding or shouldn't be riding. If you hop on that thing and it brings you joy, have at it. And it is not on anyone else to tell you that you're wrong. Yeah,
for sure. So, but yeah, I do think there's quite a few people out there that should be considering custom rather than obsessing over a few hundred grams. Basically anyone that's on an Athos or similar race bike with a full stack of stem spacers and the stem flipped upright, I think that is the sort of customer that probably would be a lot happier long term on a titanium bike once they get over the fact that it might be half a kilogram heavier.
Or a custom carbon bike. There are plenty of them out there too.
Or a custom carbon bike. But yeah, something that isn't offering geometry that is a compromise between what the pros have asked for and what they can sell in the market. I think there is a large portion of customers that should be looking outside of the mainstream for their bike.
I think one thing that is worth reminding people of is that when someone says custom, you automatically think outrageously expensive. And sure, generally speaking, custom bikes are not cheap. You're not going to find like $1,000 bike that was made for you. That's awesome. I mean, you might find $1,000 bike that was made for you, but it's probably not going to be awesome. But particularly if you look at materials that are not carbon fiber, and even with titanium, you can find a custom titanium bike that is not crazy expensive, but certainly would be competitive with a lot of off-the-shelf, higher-end options that you would get in carbon fiber from a mainstream brand. So, and I think in a lot of ways, the mainstream companies have done the carbon industry a lot of favors by making their bikes so expensive because it suddenly makes the custom options look a lot more feasible.
For sure. Yeah. I know, like, I've spoken with Darren Baum of Baum Cycles a lot about this, and he's strongly of the opinion that, like, if you put him in a room with S-Works, he wants that opportunity to talk to an S-Works customer, because his bikes are very premium, some of the most premium in the world, but they're not that different to an S-Works in terms of price point. So at that point, it's just about educating a customer about what they may be missing. And I think that's a pretty interesting way of looking at it, that, yeah, I mean, these custom bike brands are in many ways looking for the same customer that is already buying an off-the-shelf bike, because the prices of those off-the-shelf bikes are quite high. So yeah, it is. I think what we're talking about really is like it's an education matter. Is that
totally
customers don't know what they're missing or don't know what they could gain by going custom or a hand-built bike. And I think that's something to just put out there, that if you're looking for a new bike, consider, maybe if the bike you're buying needs 4 or 5 spaces underneath the stem, perhaps there's a better option for you.
Yeah, and like if I look at this Mosaic in particular, like I said, it's about $12,500 US complete as they supplied it to me. A top end S-Works Crux is what, like around there, or maybe even a little bit more. Yeah. And then okay, fine, it's lighter, sure.
Yeah.
But if you don't care that much about the weight, and we know that weight doesn't really matter that much for performance, not as much as we used to think it did anyway. But if you compare an off-the-shelf flagship bike like that to something where I can tell you that, okay, this company is going to do a custom tube set or a custom layup or something like that, and you'll have custom geometry that fits your body perfectly, and you can pick every single part that's on there, and you can have it painted however you want it, and so on and so forth.
Yep. And you can put it in a travel case without worrying about the frame cracking.
Yeah, all of a sudden that becomes a much more palatable option. Like it almost seems like the more sensible one for a lot of people.
Yep. But at the same time, we're saying all this, and I'm still guilty of looking at weights and buying the carbon frame because it is half a kilogram lighter. So
I mean, it's interesting.
A hard one. It's a hard one to overcome.
We say and we know that the numbers support the notion that weight doesn't matter that much.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, lighter bikes are kind of more fun to ride. So like there's that element to it too.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said, there's no right or wrong answer here. But I think it's important to think about the fact that there are options, and someone should just pick whatever option suits them best. And they should go by what works for them, not what someone else tells you they should be on.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Well, speaking about picking things for ourselves, I think it's time for pick one. And Dave, you picked the category this time. So what are we looking at?
Titanium frames.
That is not what we talked about.
Oh, saddles.
This is I guess a little bit of a controversial one for us, mainly because saddles are, I would say, the most personal item you can find on your bike.
Yeah.
What are your favorites here?
My favorites for a long time. So I struggled for a while with saddles because I had some nerve impingement and tendonitis and sciatica related issues in my hip. So I got very fussy with saddles, and eventually I found, this is quite a few years ago now, almost 10 years ago, I found the Specialized Phenon in a 155 millimeter width, which is their mountain bike saddle at the time. Actually offered a shape that gave me proper support and didn't impinge on that nerve and allowed me to cycle comfortably. And I put that saddle on every single bike I owned, and it let me get back into riding, really. And since then, the Specialized Power came out, and it looked a whole lot like the Phenon I liked, but with a chopped off nose. And yeah, in recent years, I've started to slowly, a lot of my bikes still have the Phenon, but yeah, when I buy new saddles now, I'm now going with the original Specialized Power shape. And my very favorite of that is the Elaston Mimic version.
Ooh, the squishy one.
The squishy one, which is actually released technically as a women's saddle, but hey, so is the Power. And I'm sold on that one. It's not as expensive as the 3D printed stuff, but it's still pretty up there.
The Power wasn't introduced as a women's saddle, was it?
I think it was intended as a women's saddle. Is the story
okay.
I heard?
See.
Is
Gotcha.
that the R&D team designed it as a women's saddle, and then a lot of the men within Specialized working there sort of stole it and just released it as a unisex model.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense, because I definitely don't remember it being marketed as a women's specific saddle initially. It just happened to work really well for an awful lot of people.
Yeah.
What about for like cross country or trail or something like that? What do you like to use there? Same saddle?
So for a while, I preferred the longer length of the Phenon, which would give me more room to move and sort of also steer the bike a little bit with the saddle between my thighs. But since a few years ago, I've also just decided the same saddle also works in mountain bike without too much compromise. And I no longer miss not having that longer nose to sit on when you're climbing steep hills. I've just overcome that.
Interesting, because I feel like my saddle choice kind of varies a bit depending on the type of bike that I'm on. So road and gravel, I definitely use quite a lot. I share your affection for Specialized saddles. Although I kind of tend to go a little bit more toward the Roman, which is a little bit slightly more traditional shape, full length.
A bit flatter across its width as well.
Little bit flatter.
Yeah.
And I particularly like the mirror version because it's just so cushy. And like on the road, I don't necessarily need the extra length per se. Like if they had just chopped off the nose of that Roman, it'd be probably just fine, because I tend to kind of just plant myself in a particular spot on the road and just call it good. Cross country though, I've kind of shifted away a little bit, and I'm now have been using for the last few months a Selle Italia SLR Boost X Cross. Which I used to absolutely love Selle Italia saddles. They used to fit me really, really well. And I can't remember when I started moving away to specialized ones. It actually may have been with the introduction of the Power. But one common thing I have found is that, at least for me, I do like saddles that are flatter, not necessarily totally flat. Definitely like saddles with a lot of central relief or a cutout or something like that. And that when I came back to Selle Italia, I realized like, oh, actually, this is the sort of the shape that I started with, that I always knew that I liked, that I went to the Specialized because it was kind of like that in a lot of ways, but different in others. And now that Selle Italia, it still has the shape that I like, but kind of with some more modern features and lighter weight and stuff like that. And I found it works really well cross country because I do
isn't 130 mil in width anymore.
Yeah, it's helpful.
They made them wider.
As it turns out. And then, like on my trail bike, I have gone to a Pro Stealth Off-Road, which is kind of like a more thickly padded version that Pro offers of the Stealth. And the Stealth in and of itself was already kind of like a Power-esque saddle. This one just has a lot more padding, like a much fatter nose, stuff like that, particularly at the rear. And that has worked really well for me. But I think generally speaking, I feel like I have moved. And I think I've just kind of always found that I liked, when given the opportunity, saddles that were a little bit little bit flatter even before that kind of became fashionable.
Yeah. So when you're talking about flatter, are you talking about along the length or across the width?
Mostly across the width. The ones that are, I do find on saddles that are pretty flat front to back, but depending on the saddle, I feel like on the road I'd like a little bit of scoop, kind of just to, again, like kind of find that comfy place and then just sit there. Off road, I think I like saddles that are a little bit flatter front to rear because they kind of encourage you to move around a little bit more. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I've ended up with. But anyway, like I think it's safe to say that you and I have ended up on these selections by using an awful lot of different saddles. And I think it's safe to say that a lot of people listening to this right now, they're probably like, I have no idea what I like because I've only ridden maybe 2 or 3 saddles ever and don't really know what works well, what doesn't work well for me. Like, how do people figure that out?
Saddles are such a insanely complicated topic. I remember I had the opportunity to talk with bike fitting legend / is he a biomechanist? Andy Pruitt, Boulder local. He's kind of one of the fundamental people behind Specialized Body Geometry line of products as well. And I remember chatting to him about this, and he basically said, like, right saddle, wrong position is the wrong saddle. So people could end up buying the perfect saddle for them and have the bike fit done incorrectly or the saddle placed in the wrong spot, and they'll never know it's the perfect saddle for them. So I think that's the hard part with saddles is if you work with a good bike fitter or you're comfortable on the bike and you never have to think about your saddle, then I'd be looking closely at your position and what features of that saddle might be leading to that. So for me, like you're talking about kind of preferring a saddle that is flatter across its width. I know through experience that a saddle that's too flat across its width actually rubs on my tendon that I have a chronic issue with, and I can't actually sit in it for very long. So I actually need a saddle that tapers off on the edges and gives more of a rounded edge for my tendon. And I think that is something that's often overlooked. Is people do pay a lot of attention to the length of the saddle and kind of the shape across the length, like whether it's flat, whether it's sort of concave, or whether it has a big channel through the center. But very few people are actually paying attention to sort of the interface between where your hip sits and where your leg comes down and what that shape looks like. And I think that is actually a pretty crucial element to the shape of a saddle. Some people like a sort of a flat edge that sort of drops straight off, and others, like me, need a more rounded edge, a smoother radius. And at the point where that width is as well. Some saddles carry a more consistent width through the saddle, like that width tapers off smoothly, and others really cut between a narrow front section and a wider rear section. I was just gonna say, like, kind of like how an S-Works power works very well for me, but the power mirror doesn't necessarily work that well for me because the midsection is a lot fatter. That's definitely very savvy advice from Andy as far as the fit versus saddle model thing. For sure, making sure that you are fit properly to your bike is almost always the first place you should look. But and changing the saddle completely changes your bike fit. Yes, is the other thing. Agreed.
But another thing that people should consider is that a lot of saddle companies now, or a lot of saddle brands, I should say, they do have demo programs through various shops. So if you are sitting there thinking, seriously, no pun intended, kind of wondering whether or not you could be more comfortable, or maybe if you're thinking to yourself, like, riding a bike shouldn't literally be a pain in the butt. Let's put it that way. So it definitely doesn't have to be that way. And if you're curious if you could do better, start calling around to local shops and see if they have any demo saddles that you can swap on for a while. Usually they're made in like pretty garish colors, and they say in like huge letters on them, demo or something like that, kind of to discourage people from just walking away with them. But that's something to look into, because generally speaking, like, now you and I know the sorts of characteristics that we like in a saddle. We can probably almost look at any saddle and be like, yeah, that'll work for me, or that won't work for me. But that's only, again, through a whole bunch of trial and error. And if you haven't gone through the trial and error, it's worthwhile.
Yeah, it's an incredibly complicated topic, and it's definitely one of those topics that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. But yeah, like Andy Prout as well. He was responsible for putting me on a saddle that sort of started to help me get back on the bike, because what he had explained to me is that the saddles I was always using, 130, 135 millimeter width. What wasn't well understood back then, this is 10 years ago, but is that if the saddle's too narrow, you'll actually sit unevenly in it, and the saddle can actually drop in behind, sort of behind the, I'm sorry, I'm not a doctor, I'm going to butcher this, but behind the joint, effectively. And I was getting nerve pinching through a saddle that was basically working itself in between a joint that shouldn't.
Interesting.
That should have otherwise been supported. And yeah, if it wasn't for him sort of pointing that out, I probably would have taken many, many more years to get onto a saddle that I thought was too wide for me. So yeah, there is a lot of nuance here, and I think it's worth considering that, yeah, what works for one person absolutely isn't going to work for another. But yeah, even your point on the demo saddles are awesome. I love that these programs exist, but you can't just bolt it in place and go for a ride. That demo saddle kind of needs to be refitted. And there are ways around doing that, and there's certain protocols that you can follow to get close. But yeah, different saddle shape is going to change how you interact with the bike, and I think you're just bolting on a whole bunch of saddles is just going to make you more confused often, because you're going to end up introducing other issues and other discomforts through changing your fit without knowing it. So I think fundamentally, finding yourself a really good bike fitter that has experience in seeing how people interact with the bike and kind of having 3 or 4 saddles that they know works for those different interactions might save you a lot of time and butt ache.
Yeah, and in the long run, even though bike fitters aren't exactly cheap, it might save you more money later.
Yep. The saddles aren't cheap.
Saddles aren't. Well, a lot of them aren't.
3
cheap
hours
anyway.
of the bike fitter is, I think, cheaper than a specialized mirror saddle. So
lots of things are less expensive than a specialized mirror saddle, Dave.
Yeah.
All right. Well, not to belabor that point, because again, we could probably talk about saddles all day. But again,
and still get no closer to recommending
and still get no closer to recommending one. Yes, because again, it is a super personal topic. But hopefully, we have given you a little bit of information to help you figure that out for yourself. Dave, what's our PSA this week?
Our PSA this week is something. Is this the one you recommended that I had already written? Started writing a draft article on.
It's exactly it.
Okay. All right. Let's see if I can articulate this. Basically, you get used to your bike being crummy. Most people will ride a bike and slowly the performance degrades. Slowly, the brakes get softer, the shifting gets worse. There might be a few noises that you've become accustomed to hearing and you no longer notice. Things just start getting sloppier feeling and not working as well as they do. But because it happens slowly, you don't pick up on it. You don't notice it and you're not bothered by it. And I guess that's the PSA, is that once in a while, if you do all your own maintenance, once in a while, I would still say maybe annually, take it to a professional mechanic that has a good reputation and have them reset the bike for you and get that new bike feeling. And then you will know what you were missing. Perhaps you weren't missing anything, and that'll confirm to you that you're a great mechanic. But if you get the bike back and everything works far better, then that is signs that you should probably be doing more maintenance and figure out where you're lacking in your ability and perhaps recruit that mechanic more often.
Yeah, I guess the reason why...
That's PSA.
I think it is. I mean, I guess the reason why this one came to mind for me, one, because I was browsing around on your computer remotely, but two, because I've got a buddy who...
Don't look in that folder.
I've got a buddy's bike in the work stand behind me here, and I hadn't worked on his bikes before, and like what he thought was just a pretty minor issue, but it turns out the upper headset cup, the flange all the way around is cracked clean off, so there was no way for the headset to work properly at all. Never seen that happen before. And it also turns out that his entire rear end on this bike, it's a full suspension transition, that entire rear end is pretty sloppy. Like there's definitely a lot of side-to-side play in it, and he really didn't know that much about either. Like he's been riding it this way for quite a while. Because again, like that sort of thing, it degrades over time. You don't really notice it little by little. I would almost guarantee the oil in his fork is either non-existent or super nasty. And stuff like that. Like, so I'm going to end up kind of going through this thing realistically, probably tip to tail, because I can't really help myself. And I suspect it's going to feel quite different to him because, like you said, like you don't really remember what it felt like new when things change very slowly.
Yeah, for sure. And another point to that, which I'm just thinking of now, is a lot of people only get their bike serviced when they feel their shifting isn't working reliably. And that's their point at like, oh, now the bike's not working. There's a lot to a bicycle beyond the shifting. So even if you're able to maintain your shifting, there's a chance that a mechanic will find other things that could become problematic and are probably preventing you from enjoying your bike as much as you could. So yeah, bikes are expensive and there's no reason to ride one that is set up to not be as best as it can. If you're riding a high-end bike, get it serviced to a point that the bike was intended to work, and has it working as best as it can, because otherwise you may as well just be on a cheap thing.
Yeah, and I guess just one last thing to close out this section here is a lot of people, when they get to that point, they're thinking to themselves like, oh, this bike's all clapped out, I need to get a new one. When in reality, a lot of times all they need is like a good service, good overhaul on a bunch of stuff, and like their bike is almost literally as good as new. And then that might cost you a few $100, but it might also save you several thousand because you don't have to buy a new one anymore.
Yep. And I guess we're going to just keep going around in circles on this one, but more frequent maintenance will also prevent you from ever getting to the point where you're like, this bike is clapped out, I have to get a new one. If you're not into forever replacing your products, frequent servicing will make things last longer.
Yep. Take care of your stuff. All right, Dave, let's close out this show. We've got a few bits of small news here. Interestingly, all wheel related today. Roval just announced some crazy light mountain bike wheels called the Control SL Team. They're building that with 29 mil wide carbon fiber rims, super aggressively machined aluminum hubs with DT Swiss guts, and just 20 carbon fiber spokes per wheel. That's the first time that Specialized has done a carbon spoked wheel, all of which supposedly tip the scales at just 1,190 grams, which is 50 grams lighter than their already light Control SLs. Interestingly, Roval is only making 400 of these. Retail price of $3,300 US, but that includes a pair of tires, wheel bags, a dyno plug kit, a couple of water bottles, 20 spare spokes, an extra set of bearings, and both SRAM XD and Shimano Micro Spline free hub bodies.
And one-on-one dinner with your choice of rider from the factory race team.
Where would you go to dinner, Dave?
I would like to go to... I don't know.
Okay. More importantly, if you go to dinner with that factory rider, who's paying?
Specialized. It's built into the wheel cost.
Oh, okay. Well, then in that case,
I think that is obviously a bad joke, but I think the included in your box set is the signatures of the factory riders.
Yes. Yes.
So
that's as close as you get.
Yeah. I like the weight of these wheels. I think it's worth noting that the rim is actually unchanged from Specialized's existing Roval SL wheels, Control SL wheels, and it's all in the carbon spokes and then a lighter hub with DT Swiss 180 internals. So, and fewer spokes as well at the same time. So, not wholly new, but that weight is pretty impressive for a stock wheel set with a rim that's as proven for strength as that Control rim is. Yep,
very, very. So pretty impressive. Neither of us have them on hand, but if they're only making 400 of them,
neither of us are going to get them.
I was just going to say, since they're only making 400 of them, I'm not holding my breath. Anyway. No. Moving on, Zipp doesn't have any new wheels to introduce, but they do have a new program called Ride Ready. It's intriguing. This program lets you choose tires, cassettes, and rotors to go along with your new 303 Firecrest or your 353 NSW wheels. And Zipp will install everything for you, so you're at least theoretically ready to go. Just slap the setup on your bike and head out the door. It's not a huge list of options. Just Goodyear tires, for example, and only red and force cassettes. But it kind of feels like Zipp is maybe trying to remove some of the uncertainty and hesitation that people might have about hookless road setups just by providing a totally pre-assembled setup that should supposedly be ready to go. It certainly ups the convenience factor, and it is something that probably a lot of other companies wouldn't necessarily be able to offer because these are obviously essentially in-house products. I mean, Goodyear is not an in-house brand, but SRAM and Goodyear have a pretty close relationship to each other.
Yeah, quite a few consumer direct wheel brands have done this for quite a while. I think Hunt for a long time has offered the ability to buy tires with your wheels pre-installed. Scribe was another one that was doing this. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other brands. So maybe this is just Zipp trying to, see, I guess maybe even test the market to see how much demand there is for this sort of service. But is it more consumer direct or is it through retailers?
It's consumer direct. You just order it straight off of Zipp.com.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. Yeah. So I'd say it's more an option for them to try compete with the likes of Hunt versus more than that.
Yeah. So, well, either way, interesting. Speaking of road wheels, if you're looking to go super, super aero, Reynolds has some new 80 mil deep road wheels that, quote, set a new standard in aerodynamic performance that delivers both speed and stability without compromise, unquote. So in other words, supposedly not only fast, but actually usable in crosswinds. Reynolds is going to have these in 3 tiers, ranging in price from like $1,450 US up to $2,300, so a pretty decent range, all with the same 21 mil wide internal width carbon rim. It's optimized for 28 to 30 mil tires, weights ranging from like 1625 up to just under 1,800 grams. So I would imagine this is going to be kind of more of a triathlete special. Because we haven't really seen new releases for super deep wheels in quite a while. So I guess it's fun to see that the category is not dead.
No, the category is definitely not dead. But I think, generally speaking, I think 50 to 60 mil wheels are so good these days and so well rounded in weight and handling and also feeling fast and measuring fast too. That I think, the market demand for even deeper wheels is kind of just become limited to more like what time trial and triathlon markets really, and maybe some sort of criterium specialist races, but that's also a small market for people wanting to spend real money on a bike that's probably going to be crashed out at some point.
Oof. That hurts.
Sorry. But I think it's cool to see that supported. It's also cool to see that it's supported at a price point that is affordable.
Yeah, it's good to see that offered at a range.
So
speaking of affordable, Hunt, definitely a brand that's known for affordable wheels. They just announced 3 new wheels that, interestingly enough, the focus is on sustainability. Carbon fiber rims, they're made with recycled materials, apparently. Not really sure the percentage of recycled materials. They just says recycled. But what's intriguing is they're made...
I think it was just 10%.
It's probably not a ton. Recycling carbon fiber is hard and expensive. But what's neat is this is a new thing for Hunt. They're making these rims using resin transfer molding techniques instead of the usual hand-laid pre-pregs. And they're also using reusable wax cores instead of kind of like disposable polymer mandrels. Also using uncoated Sapim spokes and nipples because I guess there's fewer chemical processes required in that. And local assembly for shorter transportation distances. So 2-road, 1 mountain bike wheel model here. Pretty aggressive pricing, which is, again, typical for Hunt. And apparently part of the company's overall more apparent push to reduce its carbon emissions. So how much of that is really going to matter? I don't know. Hard to say. It is nice to see carbon fiber manufacturing that emphasizes reducing waste in general. So, I mean, is it a small step? Yeah, maybe. Is it a good step, at least in the right direction? Sure. I'll take it.
Yeah. Any small effort is better than no effort. But I still think, bigger picture, I'd still argue if you're truly worried about your carbon footprint,
go with aluminum.
A carbon fiber wheel set is not your best pick. Yeah, like a nice aluminum wheel set is, I still think, one that's potentially assembled local to you, so you haven't freighted big wheel boxes around the world, I think is probably still the most economical and eco-friendly option available. And, picking one with a hub that is rebuildable for life, I think is also an important element to consider. So,
Well, thankfully, Hunt, if I read that press release correctly, they are building those wheels with their latest ratchet design hub, which should be pretty reliable. I think it's not like swappable DT Swiss guts or anything like that. But Star ratchet hubs generally do hold up pretty well. So yeah. Anyway, interesting. Finally, Chris King has partnered with a company called Groundkeeper Custom to offer custom decals for its wheels, either to match just the hub anodizing on the hubs that you've chosen, or to suit just about any color or pattern you want to match on your bike. So definitely not a big news item here, but it is kind of neat. If you have a set of Chris King wheels, they are going to have rim decals that are sized to match. Kind of expensive. They're like $70 a set. But if you are going for the bling, that's an easy way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, such custom decals have been offered by other companies for a while now, but it's not super common to see it offered direct from a wheel manufacturer. I think Envy did play at it for a while, but I don't know if they still do offer it. But yeah, it is definitely a nice way to add some customization to your bike. And on that, James, if you had kept that Mosaic and not given it back already, and bought it for yourself, and then you decided to get some Chris King wheels, what decals would you be getting for said Chris King wheels? Would you just be sticking with the plain black, or would you be...
Oh, good question.
How would you match it?
In that particular case, that bike's got an awful lot of color on it already. It's like a pearlescent white with this pearlescent magenta to navy fade in this like huge down tube logo. I'd say if I were to do anything, it'd probably be along the lines of that magenta and navy. Like, I don't know, maybe magenta at the back and navy in the front, something like that. That could be kind of fun. But otherwise, in that particular case, that bike already had a lot of color. So I'm not sure 100% that I'd add more.
Yeah. So keeping in mind, I'm actually kind of a boring person. I wear a lot of like black jeans with black t-shirt and black and white sneakers. I think custom wheel decals are hard to get right to the point where they actually add to the bike's aesthetic.
Sure.
I personally more tend to sway towards the minimalist look when it comes to rims.
It can quickly go wrong, as so many people do with like their car wheels and that sort of thing. Like just adding something doesn't necessarily always add something. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But again, if you do it right, you have an option. Yeah. All right. Well, finally, a little bit of news of my own, I guess. This will actually be my last.
A little bit.
Yeah. Just a little bit.
I'm just gonna. Sorry. Before you get to this, I'm so sorry to all the listeners. I did ask James not to bury the lead on this one and for us to start the episode. He thought it would be a little bit of a bummer to start the episode with this. It's also why I don't think I made a single pun. Because I'm not really feeling in the mood to do so. So, James, what's your news?
This will actually be my last Geek Warning podcast. I actually just resigned from Escape Collective a few weeks ago, and my last day is, by the time you listen to this episode, is basically today. It'll be Friday, May 24th. So yeah, it's been a good run. It's about 14 months or so, I think. So just want to say thanks to all of you listening right now for all the support over the last year plus. So definitely been an eventful and memorable ride, but it's time for me to move on and do something else here. So Geek Warning will continue on, but without me. So with that, thanks for listening, everyone, and farewell.
James, I'm getting a little emotional now because I think we've worked together. What did we say? 12 years or something across 3 publications?
I can't remember exactly now, but it's been well over a decade for sure.
Yeah, it's been a while. So I'm struggling not to get a little emotional here, but I'm just going to say thank you for your contribution to cycling and to getting everyone on better bikes and to informing everyone. And I think you're looking forward to just taking some time off, riding your bike, spending some time with the kid, spending some time with the dogs.
100% looking to take some time off. And then, a lot of people are asking what I'm doing next. And the honest answer is, I don't really know. But what I am going to do in the immediate future, the next month or two, is as little as possible. So I think I think I'm ready for that at the moment. So, what comes next? TBD. We'll see.
At Angry Asian on Instagram is probably how people can stay in touch.
Probably the easiest. Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, James, I am greatly going to miss you. Yeah, I will stop there before I start crying.
Well, Dave. I mean, I'll make sure I keep in touch. I'll just leave you random notes on your computer every now and then, so it'll be all good.
Yeah, if you find the time, if you could just add to some of the articles as well, that would be
perfect. I will do that, Dave. I'll just go ahead and drop in a few little extra references there. It's the least I can do after all this time.
Amazing. All right, James. It's been real, and yeah, I guess Geek Warning will continue. We haven't nailed down the exact plan of what the cast looks and sounds like, but expect some known names and some familiar voices to join me on the pod in the near future.
Sounds good, Dave. Don't screw it up. That's all. Don't screw it up. No pressure. All right.
I've been trying to lower the bar the whole time, but you just keep raising it. So anyway,
all right. Well, in that case, Dave, good luck to you.
Thanks, James. All right.
Well, again, thanks to everyone for listening, and I'll see you around somewhere.
Cheers.